The harder you try to control your emotions, the more they control you. But that's exactly what most people get wrong about emotional mastery. 2,000 years ago, Epictetus, a slave who became Rome's greatest teacher of mental strength, discovered 9 counterintuitive principles that can transform your emotional chaos into unshakable inner peace. These ancient secrets helped Marcus Aurelius rule an empire while facing personal tragedies, and today they can help you master your mind in ways modern psychology is only beginning to understand. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Imagine this. You're stuck in gridlocked traffic. Your important meeting starts in 15 minutes, but you're still 20 minutes away. Your heart pounds as anxiety builds. Then, someone cuts you off, nearly causing an accident. Rage floods your system. You grip the steering wheel tighter, trying desperately to push the anger down, telling yourself, "I shouldn't feel this way. I need to calm down." But the harder you fight against these emotions, the stronger they become. Does this sound familiar? This frustrating loop, trying to control our emotions only to have them control us instead, represents one of the most universal human struggles we face. We've all been there, fighting against unwanted feelings, trying to suppress them, only to find they return with even greater intensity. What if I told you that the conventional wisdom about emotional control is not just ineffective, but potentially making your emotional life worse? In our modern world, we're constantly bombarded with messages about emotional regulation. Just breathe, think positive, push the negative feelings away. Yet despite all these techniques, rates of anxiety and emotional distress continue to rise globally. A recent meta-analysis spanning 44 countries found that approximately 33% of people will experience debilitating anxiety at some point in their lives. Another study revealed that the average person spends approximately 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they're doing, and this mind-wandering frequently triggers negative emotions. The harder we try to force emotional control, the more elusive it becomes. It's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. This paradox was recognized over 2,000 years ago by a group of philosophers whose wisdom has stood the test of time: the Stoics. When most people hear Stoic, they imagine someone cold, unfeeling, suppressing all emotions, essentially a human robot. Nothing could be further from the truth. The ancient Stoics weren't emotionless machines. They were pragmatic psychologists who discovered something profound about human nature. True emotional mastery comes not from fighting against emotions, but from a radical shift in how we relate to them. Consider Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, who ruled during one of the most turbulent periods in history. Despite commanding the most powerful empire on earth, he struggled with the same emotional challenges you face. In his private journal entries, later published as Meditations, he wrote about his frustrations with incompetent advisors, his anxiety over political threats, and his fear of failing those who depended on him. His solution wasn't to fight these emotions, but to examine the judgments that created them. As he wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Then there's Seneca, one of Rome's wealthiest individuals who battled crippling anxiety despite his privilege and status. As a political advisor, he lived under constant threat, eventually being ordered to commit suicide by Emperor Nero. Yet he discovered that emotional freedom came not from controlling external circumstances, but from understanding the true nature of his reactions to them. Perhaps most relevant to our modern struggles was Epictetus, who began life as a slave with a crippled leg, someone with every reason to be bitter and resentful. Instead, he developed psychological techniques so powerful they transformed the ancient world and continue to influence modern therapeutic approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy today. What these philosophers discovered wasn't just theoretical wisdom. It was a practical system for navigating life's chaos while maintaining inner peace. Their approach wasn't about suppressing emotions, but understanding their true causes and learning to work with them rather than against them. Let me ask you to try something right now. Think of an emotion that's been troubling you recently. Perhaps anxiety about a work situation, frustration with a family member, or disappointment about something that didn't go as planned. For just 30 seconds, rather than trying to make this emotion go away, simply observe it with curiosity. Notice where you feel it in your body. Is it a tightness in your chest? A knot in your stomach? Just observe without judgment. What you're doing right now, creating a space between yourself and your emotion, is the first step toward the Stoic approach to emotional mastery. Rather than being consumed by the emotion or fighting against it, you're simply noticing it. This small shift is revolutionary. The central insight of Stoicism can be summarized in one counterintuitive truth. Emotions aren't directly caused by external events, but by our judgments about those events. The traffic jam isn't making you angry. Your judgment that this shouldn't be happening is creating your anger. The criticism from your colleague isn't causing your hurt. Your interpretation that this means I'm inadequate is generating your pain. This isn't just ancient philosophy, it's been confirmed by modern neuroscience. Brain imaging studies have shown that our emotional reactions involve complex interactions between the prefrontal cortex, where judgment happens, and the limbic system, where emotions are generated. When we understand this process, we gain access to emotional freedom that fighting our feelings can never provide. Think about it this way. Have you ever noticed how two people can experience the exact same situation, yet have completely different emotional reactions? One person receives critical feedback and feels devastated, while another sees it as valuable information for improvement. One person faces a major change and feels overwhelming anxiety, while another experiences it as exciting. The difference isn't in the external event, it's in the interpretation. This doesn't mean your emotions aren't real or valid, they absolutely are. But understanding their true source gives you leverage that trying to suppress them never will. I've seen this transformation countless times in my work. Take the case of a project manager who was constantly stressed about deadlines and team performance. She tried every relaxation technique imaginable, deep breathing, meditation, even medication, but the anxiety always returned. When she learned the Stoic approach, she realized her stress wasn't coming from the deadlines themselves, but from her judgment that if the project isn't perfect, it means I'm a failure. Once she identified and questioned this judgment, her relationship with work stress fundamentally changed. Or consider a healthcare professional who dealt with difficult patients daily. He would often leave work emotionally drained after absorbing others' frustrations. Through Stoic principles, he learned that his emotional exhaustion came not from patients' behaviors, but from his interpretation that I should be able to make everyone happy. When he shifted to I can offer my best care while recognizing I can't control others' responses, his emotional experience transformed completely. It's important to understand that Stoicism isn't about becoming emotionless. This is perhaps the biggest misconception about this philosophy. The goal isn't to stop feeling, it's to feel emotions in a healthier, more empowering way. In fact, the Stoics recognized the importance of positive emotions like joy, love, and appropriate concern. They simply understood that fighting against emotions creates suffering, while understanding them creates freedom. Think of emotions like water in a river. When you try to dam a powerful river, pressure builds until the dam eventually breaks, often causing more damage than if the water had flowed naturally. Similarly, trying to block emotions creates internal pressure that eventually erupts, often at the worst possible moments. The Stoic approach isn't about building dams, it's about learning to navigate the river skillfully. This approach is particularly valuable in our modern world, where emotional challenges seem to multiply daily. The constant connectivity of our digital lives means we're exposed to more potential triggers than ever before. Social media presents endless opportunities for comparison and judgment. Work boundaries blur, creating perpetual availability that can lead to burnout. Family dynamics grow increasingly complex in our changing social landscape. In this environment, traditional approaches to emotional regulation often fall short. Telling yourself "don't worry" rarely stops worry. Forcing yourself to just calm down rarely produces calm. The Stoic approach offers a different path, one that works with your brain's natural functioning rather than against it. By the end of our journey together, you'll have access to practical Stoic techniques that will transform how you experience difficult emotions. Instead of being constantly hijacked by anger, anxiety, or hurt, you'll develop the ability to experience life's full range of emotions without being controlled by them. You'll learn to create space between stimulus and response, what psychologists call emotional agility, giving you choices where previously you felt none existed. This isn't abstract theory. It's practical wisdom you can apply immediately. Each technique I'll share has been tested both by ancient philosophers living through war, plague, and political turmoil, and by modern individuals navigating today's unique challenges. The transformation available to you isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself, freed from the emotional reactivity that often makes us act in ways we later regret. It's about responding to life's challenges with wisdom rather than reacting from triggered emotional states. If you've been fighting a losing battle with your emotions, I promise you this: there is a better way. The ancient Stoics discovered it, modern psychology has validated it, and by the end of our time together, you'll have practical tools to implement it in your daily life. The very emotions that currently cause you suffering can become valuable sources of information and growth. Anxiety can transform from an overwhelming force to a signal about what matters to you. Anger can shift from a destructive impulse to information about your boundaries. Sadness can evolve from something to escape to a meaningful connection with your values. This journey won't always be easy. There will be moments of challenge as you unlearn habitual patterns of emotional reaction. But with consistent practice of the techniques we'll explore, you'll develop a relationship with your emotions that feels like freedom rather than constant struggle. Remember, the goal isn't to never feel difficult emotions. The goal is to experience the full range of human emotions without being controlled by them. To feel anger without acting destructively, to experience anxiety without being paralyzed by it, to feel disappointment without being defined by it. As we continue, I invite you to approach these teachings with an open mind and a willingness to question assumptions about how emotions work. The insights that transformed the lives of ancient philosophers facing extreme circumstances can certainly transform your experience in today's world. But there exists a distinction that completely changed my life when I learned it from the Stoics. A principle so simple that it seems obvious after you know it, but so powerful that it immediately resolves 80% of unnecessary emotional suffering. It's called the dichotomy of control, and it's about to transform how you respond to every stressful situation. This distinction between what you can and cannot control is the most liberating concept I've ever encountered, and it's at the heart of Stoic wisdom. When you truly understand it, you'll immediately feel a weight lift from your shoulders, because you'll stop exhausting yourself fighting against the unchangeable. Let's explore what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control. your emotional border patrol that instantly distinguishes between what deserves your energy and what doesn't. Epictetus, who knew a thing or two about lack of control as a former slave, expressed it with beautiful simplicity. Some things are within our power, while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, and, in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. Think about how much emotional energy you spend daily worrying about things entirely outside your control. The weather that might ruin your plans, the traffic that makes you late, the economy that affects your investments, the opinions others hold about you, the decisions your company makes, the past that can't be changed. It's exhausting, isn't it? And completely unproductive. I want you to try something right now. Think about something that's been causing you stress recently. Maybe it's a work project with a tight deadline, a relationship difficulty, or a health concern. Got it in mind? Good. Now, mentally sort aspects of this situation into two categories: things you can control and things you cannot. Be ruthlessly honest with yourself. For example, if you're worried about a presentation, you can control your preparation, practice, and the quality of your slides. You cannot control whether your boss will be in a good mood that day, if technical difficulties might arise, or how everyone in the room will receive your ideas. Notice what happens in your body as you make this distinction. Many people report an immediate sense of relief. Why? Because you've just given yourself permission to stop the exhausting battle with reality. This isn't just philosophical theory. It's practical emotional triage. When you focus exclusively on what you can control, you immediately reduce suffering and increase effectiveness. Your limited mental and emotional energy gets channeled exactly where it can make a difference. Let me show you how powerful this can be in everyday situations. Imagine you're preparing for an important presentation when your computer crashes, potentially losing hours of work. Your immediate emotional response might be panic and frustration. But applying the dichotomy of control, you would quickly identify, within my control, my response to the situation, the steps I take to recover my work, how I manage my time going forward, whether I had backups. Outside my control, the fact that the computer crashed, the timing of this event, the technical glitch itself. By focusing exclusively on what's within your control, you immediately redirect your energy from useless frustration to productive action. This isn't positive thinking, it's accurate thinking. I worked with a project manager who struggled with constant anxiety over her team's performance. She would lose sleep worrying about whether team members would complete their tasks on time, if stakeholders would approve the project direction, or if unexpected obstacles would arise. Through applying the dichotomy of control, she began daily control check-ins, where she would list what aspects of the project she could directly influence versus what she couldn't. Within 3 weeks, she reported that her anxiety had decreased by approximately 60%. Not because the project became less complex, but because she stopped the exhausting fight with things she couldn't control. The beauty of this approach is that it works in every area of life. Let's apply it to relationships, where we often experience our most intense emotions. Think about a relationship challenge you're facing. Maybe someone isn't communicating with you as you'd like, or perhaps you're not feeling appreciated. The dichotomy of control would help you sort within your control. How clearly you express your needs, how you respond to the other person, the boundaries you set, the values you uphold in the relationship. Outside your control, how the other person chooses to behave, their priorities, their communication style, their level of emotional availability. Do you see how clarifying? When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable aspects of relationships, you paradoxically become more effective in the areas you can influence. You communicate more clearly because you're not tangled in resentment about things you can't change. You set healthier boundaries because you recognize where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. This isn't about becoming passive, quite the opposite. The Stoics were people of tremendous action. Marcus Aurelius led armies and ran an empire. Seneca was a successful playwright and statesman. Epictetus built an influential school of philosophy despite having been enslaved. They were anything but passive. Rather, the dichotomy of control is about becoming strategic with your energy. It's about focusing your finite resources where they can actually make a difference. Let's apply this to another common source of distress: worry about the future. When uncertainty looms, anxiety often follows. But the dichotomy of control offers immediate clarity. Within your control, your preparation, your contingency planning, your savings, your skill development, your health habits. Outside your control, economic conditions, unexpected global events, technological disruptions, natural disasters, most timing aspects of life. A business owner I worked with was paralyzed by anxiety during a market downturn. She would check financial news obsessively, growing increasingly stressed about conditions she couldn't influence. After implementing the dichotomy of control, she redirected that energy to improving her service offerings, deepening client relationships, and developing new skills, all things within her control that would help her business regardless of market conditions. 6 months later, her business was thriving despite the continued market challenges, not because she controlled the economy, but because she focused exclusively on what she could control. One mistake people often make with this concept is confusing influence with control. Yes, you can influence many things: other people's perceptions, certain outcomes, various processes. But influence isn't control. It's important to recognize the difference. For example, you can influence your children's values through modeling and discussion, but you cannot control the choices they ultimately make. You can influence your health through diet and exercise, but you cannot control whether you develop certain conditions. You can influence a project's success through your contributions, but you cannot control every variable that affects the outcome. The Stoics would say that mistaking influence for control is a recipe for frustration. When you expect your influence to guarantee specific outcomes, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Another common misunderstanding is thinking that the dichotomy of control means not caring about outcomes. That's not it at all. You can care deeply about something while recognizing that it's not entirely within your control. The key is directing your emotional investment toward your efforts rather than the results. For instance, an athlete can care deeply about winning while focusing emotionally on their preparation, strategy, and performance, controllable rather than the final score, partially uncontrollable. A parent can care deeply about their child's happiness while focusing emotionally on providing support and guidance, controllable, rather than trying to ensure the child never experiences difficulty, uncontrollable. This shift from emotionally investing in outcomes to emotionally investing in your actions is revolutionary for your well-being. It allows you to remain engaged with life without the constant emotional roller coaster of attachment to specific results. Let's make this practical with a daily exercise I call the Morning Control Inventory. It takes just 5 minutes but can transform your entire day. Each morning, before checking email or social media, write down your current concerns or challenges. Then draw a line down the middle of the page, creating 2 columns: within my control and outside my control. Sort every aspect of your concerns into these columns. Be specific and honest. For the items in the within my control column, note one action you can take today. For the items in the outside my control column, practice explicitly letting go, perhaps by writing "releasing this" next to each item. This simple practice creates immediate clarity and direction. You'll start your day focused on where your energy can make a difference rather than dispersing it on things you cannot change. I recommend doing this physical exercise, actually writing it down, for at least 2 weeks until the mental pattern becomes more automatic. Eventually, you'll find yourself automatically running this filter throughout your day, asking, "Is this within my control?" when challenges arise. The power of this approach becomes particularly evident during crisis situations. When everything seems to be falling apart, the dichotomy of control provides immediate clarity on where to focus your limited resources. A healthcare worker told me how this principle helped her during the height of a health crisis in her hospital. Overwhelmed by the situation, she would start each shift by identifying what was within her control: her protection protocols, her treatment decisions, her communication with patients, her self-care between shifts. She accepted what was outside her control: the overall progression of the crisis, resource limitations, decisions made by administration, patients' individual risk factors. This clarity allowed her to remain effective and compassionate when many of her colleagues were burning out. Not because she cared less, but because she directed her care toward what she could actually influence. The dichotomy of control also transforms how you process past events that may still cause emotional pain. We often torture ourselves about things we should have done differently, even though the past is definitively outside our control. When those thoughts arise, the Stoic approach is clear. The past actions might have been within your control then, but they are outside your control now. What remains within your control is how you interpret those events, what you learn from them, and how you apply those lessons going forward. As you practice this distinction more consistently, you'll notice several significant changes. First, your baseline anxiety level will likely decrease as you stop fighting with reality. Second, your effectiveness will often increase as your energy gets focused where it matters. Third, your relationships may improve as you stop trying to control how others behave or feel. Perhaps most importantly, you'll develop what the Stoics called inner citadel, a core of calm that remains stable regardless of external chaos. Not because you've detached from life, but because you've aligned your emotional investments with what you can actually control. This approach isn't about lowering your ambitions or caring less about outcomes. It's about recognizing that your power and peace come from focusing on your actions, choices, and interpretations, the things that are genuinely yours to control. Try this right now. Pause and identify one situation causing you emotional distress. Draw a clear line between what aspects you can control and what you cannot. Notice how this creates immediate mental clarity and emotional relief. Making this distinction consistently is like developing an emotional superpower. Imagine facing challenges with this filter already in place, immediately sorting what deserves your energy from what doesn't. Imagine the emotional freedom of no longer fighting against reality itself. But while the dichotomy of control helps you stop wasting energy on the unchangeable, there's still the question of how to handle your emotional reactions to things that happen. This is where we encounter another revolutionary Stoic insight, one that explains why we react so differently to the same situations and how to change those reactions. The truth is, your emotions aren't triggered directly by events, but by your judgments about those events. By changing the story you tell yourself, you can instantly transform your emotional response. This technique, what I call the judgment reframe, gives you power exactly where you need it most, at the source of your emotional reactions. The dichotomy of control gives you tremendous power by helping you focus only on what's truly yours to influence. But there's something even more fundamental at work in your emotional life, something that explains why two people can face identical situations yet have completely different emotional responses. Have you ever wondered why some criticism rolls off your back while other comments cut deep? or why certain traffic jams make you furious while others you barely notice. The difference isn't in the events themselves. It's in the story you tell yourself about what those events mean. This brings us to what Marcus Aurelius recognized over 18 centuries ago when he wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it, and it is in your power to wipe out this judgment now." This insight is revolutionary. Your emotions aren't created directly by events, but by your interpretations of those events. The judgments you make, often unconsciously and in a split second, determine whether you feel anger, anxiety, hurt, or calm. Think about the last time you received a brief, vague email from your boss saying, "We need to talk about your project." What emotions surfaced immediately? For many people, anxiety floods their system within seconds. But why? The message itself contains no emotional content, just 7 neutral words. The anxiety comes from your interpretation. My boss is unhappy with my work. I might be criticized. This could affect my job security. This judgment happens so quickly you might not even notice it. You just feel the emotion that follows. But what if you interpreted that same message differently? My boss probably wants to discuss next steps. Or, she likely needs information for her meeting with clients. Or, perhaps she wants to expand the project based on its success so far. Each of these alternative interpretations would create entirely different emotional responses, perhaps curiosity, preparation, or even excitement. Same external event, completely different emotions, all based on your judgment. This isn't just ancient philosophy. Modern cognitive science confirms this process. Brain imaging studies show that our emotional reactions involve a complex interaction between the prefrontal cortex, where judgments happen, and the limbic system, where emotions are generated. When researchers instruct subjects to reinterpret negative stimuli, they observe decreased activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, and increased activity in regions associated with cognitive control. In other words, when you change your interpretation, you literally change how your brain processes the experience. Let me be clear. This doesn't mean your emotions aren't real or that you should dismiss them. Quite the opposite. Your emotions are providing valuable information. But that information is about your interpretations, not necessarily about external reality. I want you to try something right now. Think of a recent situation that triggered a negative emotion. Perhaps someone didn't respond to your message, or you received feedback that felt critical, or you weren't included in something you expected to be part of. First, identify the emotion you felt. Was it hurt, anger, anxiety, shame? Next, ask yourself, what interpretation or judgment created this feeling? What story did you tell yourself about what the situation meant? Perhaps, they don't respect me, or I'm not good enough, or people always exclude me. Now, generate at least 3 alternative interpretations that could equally explain the same situation. For example, if someone didn't respond to your message, alternative explanations might include, they're overwhelmed with other priorities, they haven't seen it yet, they're formulating a thoughtful response, or they're dealing with personal issues I don't know about. Notice how each of these alternative interpretations would create a different emotional response to the exact same external event. This is what I call the judgment reframe technique. It's not about forcing positive thinking. It's about recognizing that our initial interpretations are often just one of many possibilities, not objective reality. A software developer I worked with used this technique during a period of layoffs at his company. Each time management called a meeting, his initial interpretation was, "This is when they'll announce my job is being cut." This judgment created intense anxiety that affected his sleep, focus, and performance. Through practicing the judgment reframe, he learned to generate multiple interpretations. This could be about reorganizing teams. They might be updating us on company strategy. This could be about new projects coming in. By recognizing that his catastrophic interpretation was just one possibility among many, his anxiety decreased significantly. The remarkable outcome? When layoffs did eventually happen, his improved emotional state had actually enhanced his performance during the stressful period, and he was ultimately promoted while others were let go. His ability to manage his judgments directly impacted his professional trajectory. Now, you might wonder, isn't this just positive thinking in disguise? Not at all. The judgment reframe isn't about forcing yourself to believe everything is wonderful. It's about accuracy, recognizing that our initial interpretations often reflect our fears, past experiences, or insecurities, rather than the full range of possibilities. Sometimes the negative interpretation might be correct. Your boss might indeed be unhappy with your work. But even then, you have choices about what that means. This is an opportunity to improve. I can learn from this feedback. Or, this project isn't playing to my strengths, create very different emotional responses than I'm a failure. The Stoics understood something profound about human psychology. We suffer more from our judgments about things than from the things themselves. Epictetus put it bluntly, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." This insight gives you tremendous power. While you can't control many external events, you have complete authority over your interpretations of those events. This is a power that no one can take from you, not your boss, not your family, not even circumstances like illness or financial challenges. Let me walk you through how to apply the judgment reframe in real time. First, when you notice a strong emotional reaction arising, pause. This brief moment of awareness creates space between stimulus and response, what modern psychologists call the metacognitive pause. This might be just a few seconds, but it's crucial. Second, identify your current interpretation. Ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about what this situation means? Be honest about the judgment that's creating your emotional response. Third, question this interpretation. Is this the only possible explanation? What evidence do I actually have? How would someone else might view this situation? Fourth, generate at least 3 alternative explanations that could equally account for the same facts. Be creative, but realistic. Finally, select the most balanced perspective. Not necessarily the most positive one, but the one that considers all possibilities and evidence. A teacher I coached discovered through this exercise that her stress wasn't coming from her students' behavior, but from her interpretation that I should be able to control every aspect of my classroom. When she reframed this to, "My job is to provide structure and guidance, but students are individuals learning to manage their own behavior," her emotional experience transformed. This doesn't mean she stopped addressing disruptive behavior. It means she approached it with clarity, rather than taking it as a personal failure. Her effectiveness actually increased when her judgment shifted. The power of this technique extends to all areas of life. Consider relationships, where our judgments create much of our emotional suffering. When a partner is distant, we might interpret this as, "They don't care about me," creating hurt, rather than, "They're preoccupied with something difficult," creating concern or patience. When someone disagrees with us, we might interpret this as, "They're attacking me," creating defensiveness, rather than, "They have a different perspective," creating curiosity. Each of these interpretations creates a completely different emotional and behavioral response, all from the same external situation. Even physical sensations are subject to our judgments. The same racing heart could be interpreted as, "I'm having a panic attack," creating fear, or "My body is energized and ready for this challenge," creating excitement. Research on arousal reappraisal shows that simply reinterpreting physical stress symptoms as helpful rather than harmful significantly improves performance under pressure. The judgment reframe is particularly powerful for breaking free from emotional patterns that have troubled you for years. Many of our most painful emotional reactions come from judgments formed in childhood or during difficult experiences. Judgments like, "I'm not enough," "people will abandon me," or "I must be perfect to be accepted." By bringing these judgments into awareness and questioning them, you can begin to rewrite these deep interpretations. This doesn't happen overnight, but with consistent practice, even lifelong emotional patterns can shift. A parent I worked with used this technique when her teenager didn't respond to texts. Her immediate interpretation, "She's in danger or deliberately ignoring me," created intense anxiety. Through practicing the judgment reframe, she generated alternatives. "She's engaged in an activity." Her phone might be on silent. "She's developing appropriate independence." This didn't mean she stopped checking on her daughter's safety. It meant she could respond from concern rather than panic. The quality of their relationship improved as her judgment shifted from fear-based to trust-based interpretations. To build this skill into your daily life, I recommend a simple practice, the 3 interpretations exercise. Whenever something triggers a strong negative emotion, challenge yourself to generate 3 completely different explanations for the same situation. Make it a habit, like mental push-ups for emotional flexibility. At first, this might feel forced or artificial. That's normal. You're developing a new mental pathway, and like any new skill, it feels awkward initially. With practice, generating alternative interpretations becomes more automatic, happening in real time as situations unfold. The beauty of the judgment reframe is that it works regardless of whether your original interpretation was accurate. Even if your first judgment turns out to be correct, yes, your boss is unhappy with your work, or yes, your friend is upset with you, having considered multiple perspectives gives you response options rather than automatic reactivity. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate judgments entirely. That's impossible for the human mind. The goal is to hold our interpretations more lightly, recognizing them as stories we're telling ourselves rather than absolute truth. This creates space for choice in how we respond emotionally. As you practice this technique, you'll likely notice something fascinating. The same events that once reliably triggered intense emotional reactions begin to lose their power over you. Not because you're suppressing your emotions, but because you're seeing situations more completely, beyond the narrow lens of your initial judgments. Seneca captured this perfectly when he wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Much of our emotional suffering comes not from what's actually happening, but from the catastrophic, personalized, or absolutist judgments we make about what's happening. By mastering the judgment reframe, you gain freedom from these mental traps. You develop what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to see situations from multiple angles rather than being locked into one rigid interpretation. While reinterpreting situations after they happen is powerful, the Stoics had an even more effective technique for dealing with challenges before they occurred. They called it premeditatio malorum. I call it emotional fire drills. And it's like training for firefighters for your mind. Instead of being caught off guard by difficult situations, you can prepare for them with this practice that takes just 3 minutes per day. While reframing your judgments gives you power in the moment, the Stoics understood something even more profound. You can prepare your mind in advance for life's challenges. This technique creates emotional resilience before you even need it. Imagine knowing you'll face a difficult conversation tomorrow. Most people spend the night before worrying, playing out worst-case scenarios that increase their anxiety. But what if instead of worrying unproductively, you could mentally rehearse your response in a way that builds emotional strength? This is precisely what the Stoics practiced through a technique they called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Seneca described this approach beautifully. He who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive. This isn't pessimism, it's strategic emotional preparation. Think of it like this. Firefighters don't just wait for fires to happen and then figure out what to do. They run drills, practice scenarios, and mentally prepare for challenges before they occur. This preparation doesn't make them anxious, it makes them ready. In the same way, emotional fire drills don't increase anxiety. They build the mental pathways that help you respond wisely when real challenges arise. Modern psychology has validated this ancient practice through what's now called stress inoculation training. Research shows that mentally rehearsing challenges in a structured way actually reduces emotional reactivity when you face the real situation. Your brain develops pathways for responding thoughtfully rather than reactively. Here's how to practice this technique in your daily life. Each morning, spend just 3 minutes on this exercise. First, identify potential challenges in your day. Maybe you have a difficult meeting, a conversation you've been avoiding, or a situation where you typically feel stressed or reactive. Next, visualize this situation in detail. Imagine what might happen. Not just the worst case, but the most likely challenges you'll face. Then, and this is the crucial part, mentally rehearse responding with calm rationality rather than emotional reactivity. See yourself pausing, applying the dichotomy of control, questioning your judgments, and choosing a wise response. Importantly, you're not trying to prevent these situations. You're building your capacity to handle them effectively when they occur. Let me walk you through an example. Imagine you have a performance review tomorrow with a manager who tends to be critical. A typical worry pattern might spiral through all the ways they might criticize you, leading to increased anxiety and poor sleep. But the premeditation practice works differently. You'd visualize sitting in that meeting, hearing specific critiques that might arise. You'd imagine your initial emotional response, perhaps defensiveness or embarrassment. Then you'd mentally rehearse applying your Stoic tools. This feedback is about my work, not my worth. I can choose to find value in this perspective. I control my response, not their opinion. By mentally practicing this response, you're creating neural pathways that will be available to you during the actual meeting. A business executive I worked with used this technique before difficult negotiations. She would visualize potential objections or aggressive tactics from the other party and practice maintaining her composure. The result? She reported feeling 10 years more emotionally mature in these situations, able to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. What makes this approach so different from worry is its structured nature and constructive purpose. Worry is unproductive, circular thinking that increases anxiety without building solutions. Premeditation is purposeful mental preparation that creates specific response pathways. It's the difference between panicking about a test and practicing for it. You can apply this technique to virtually any challenging situation. If you struggle with social anxiety, mentally rehearse upcoming interactions, imagining potential awkward moments, and practicing responding with self-compassion rather than self-criticism. If you're preparing for a difficult conversation with a family member, visualize triggers that might arise and rehearse responding from your values rather than reactivity. This practice creates what neuroscientists call mental maps, neural pathways that your brain can follow during stress rather than defaulting to fight or flight responses. It's like having a trail already marked through a forest before you need to find your way through it in the dark. A healthcare worker told me how this technique transformed her experience during high-pressure situations. Each morning, she would spend 3 minutes visualizing challenging scenarios she might face. Difficult patients, emergency situations, conversations with distressed family members. By mentally rehearsing her calm, centered response, she created an internal reference point she could return to when real challenges arose. "It's like I've already seen the movie," she explained. "When the real situation happens, there's a part of my brain that says, I know how to handle this, instead of just reacting from panic." You might wonder, doesn't visualizing negative scenarios create more anxiety? The research shows the opposite. Structured premeditation actually reduces anxiety by creating a sense of preparedness and control. It's unstructured worry that increases anxiety. The key distinction is that you're not just imagining problems, you're rehearsing solutions. You're teaching your brain, yes, this challenge might arise, and I have tools to handle it effectively. Epictetus advised his students to practice this daily. Rehearse potential evils every morning after rising. If anything happens that you rehearsed before, then you will say, I was preparing for this all along. This preparation creates a profound sense of inner stability. Try this right now. Think about a situation coming up in the next few days that typically triggers stress or reactivity for you. It could be a meeting, a social event, a deadline, or a difficult conversation. For the next 60 seconds, visualize yourself in that situation, facing specific challenges that might arise. Now, mentally rehearse applying what you've learned, distinguishing what you can control, questioning your judgments, and responding wisely rather than reacting emotionally. Notice how different this feels from worry. Instead of spinning in anxiety, you're building capability. This is the essence of Stoic emotional preparation. The beauty of this practice is that it works whether or not the specific challenges you visualize actually occur. The mental rehearsal builds general emotional resilience that transfers to whatever situations arise. It's like working out at the gym. The specific exercises may not match exactly what you need to do in real life, but they build the strength you'll draw upon in any physical challenge. A teacher I worked with used this technique before parent-teacher conferences that often left her feeling drained and defensive. By practicing the premeditation of adversity each morning before these meetings, she developed the capacity to hear criticism without taking it personally and to respond from her educational values rather than emotional reactivity. The amazing thing, she told me, is that the specific difficult moments I visualized rarely happened exactly as I imagined. But when unexpected challenges arose, I still had that sense of, I can handle this, that came from the practice. This speaks to a broader principle the Stoics understood. Emotional resilience isn't about avoiding difficulty. It's about developing the inner resources to respond wisely to whatever arises. Seneca put it this way, we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. By practicing the premeditation of adversity, you're addressing the imagination part of suffering before it overwhelms you in the moment of challenge. To make this a sustainable practice, I recommend integrating it into your morning routine. Just 3 minutes after waking, before checking email or social media, visualize potential challenges and rehearse your wise response. This small investment pays enormous dividends in emotional resilience throughout your day. The practice becomes particularly powerful when combined with an evening reflection. At the end of each day, review how you responded to challenges. Did you maintain your composure and apply your Stoic principles? If not, mentally rehearse how you might respond differently next time. This creates a virtuous cycle of preparation and learning. You can deepen this practice by occasionally extending beyond daily challenges to larger life difficulties. The Stoics would regularly contemplate major setbacks, financial loss, illness, even death of loved ones, not from morbid fascination, but to remove the shock factor that often accompanies these events. By facing our deepest fears in a structured way, they lose some of their power over us. Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly, writing, "Begin each day by telling yourself Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. This wasn't pessimism. It was preparation that allowed him to respond with wisdom rather than surprise when these human tendencies inevitably appeared. A modern approach to this deeper practice might be a weekly resilience review, where you spend 15 minutes contemplating more significant challenges that could arise in your life and mentally rehearsing how you would apply Stoic principles to navigate them. This builds profound emotional strength for life's bigger trials. What's particularly valuable about the premeditation practice is that it works with your brain's natural functioning rather than against it. Our minds are designed to anticipate and prepare for challenges. It's an evolutionary adaptation that kept our ancestors safe. The problem isn't that we anticipate difficulties, it's that we do so in an unstructured, unproductive way that increases anxiety rather than resilience. The Stoic approach channels this natural tendency into constructive preparation. It's like redirecting a river's flow to power a mill rather than letting it flood unpredictably. As you incorporate this practice into your life, you'll likely notice several changes. First, your initial emotional reactions to challenges will likely become less intense. Second, you'll recover more quickly from disruptions. Third, you'll find yourself more present during difficult situations rather than swept away by reactivity. A client described this transformation. Before, I was always caught off guard by problems, which made each one feel like a crisis. Now, there's a part of me that stays centered through challenges, not because they don't affect me, but because I've prepared my mind to respond rather than just react. Remember that this practice isn't about suppressing emotions or becoming coldly analytical. The goal is to experience emotions in a way that informs your response rather than controls it. You still feel the natural human reactions to challenges, but they no longer hijack your behavior. The premeditation of adversity creates what the Stoics called prohairesis, the capacity for conscious choice even under pressure. This is true emotional freedom. Not freedom from feeling emotions, but freedom to choose how you respond to them. By implementing this 3-minute morning practice, you're training one of the most powerful abilities humans possess: the capacity to create space between stimulus and response. In that space lies your freedom to choose wisdom over reactivity. The fourth technique involves shifting from being the victim of your emotions to becoming their curious observer. This creates psychological distance that prevents emotional hijacking. Epictetus taught this through a powerful metaphor. Remember that you are an actor in a play of such a kind as the author chooses. This isn't about detachment from life, but engaging with it from a more empowered perspective. The premeditation of adversity gives you incredible power to prepare for challenges. But what happens when you're already in the middle of an emotional storm? This is where the Stoics developed perhaps their most profound technique, one that creates instant psychological freedom even when emotions are at their most intense. Have you ever been completely consumed by an emotion? So angry you couldn't think straight, so anxious your body tensed up, or so hurt that nothing else seemed to matter. In those moments, it feels like you are the emotion. There's no separation between you and the feeling. It's taken over completely. What if I told you there's a way to experience even your strongest emotions without being controlled by them? A mental shift so powerful it can transform your relationship with your emotional life in an instant. Epictetus captured this approach with a powerful metaphor. Remember that you are an actor in a play of such a kind as the author chooses. He wasn't suggesting life isn't real or that your emotions don't matter. He was offering a perspective shift that creates psychological freedom in any situation. This technique, which I call the Stoic perspective shift, involves moving from being the victim of your emotions to becoming their curious observer. It creates a crucial space between you and your feelings, not to suppress them, but to prevent them from hijacking your behavior. Try this right now. Think of a situation that's causing you some emotional discomfort. Notice the feeling it creates, perhaps tension, irritation, or worry. Now shift your language slightly. Instead of thinking, "I am anxious," try, "I'm noticing feelings of anxiety arising." Instead of "I'm angry," try, "I'm experiencing anger right now." Notice the subtle but profound difference. In the first framing, you are the emotion. In the second, you are the awareness experiencing the emotion. This tiny shift creates psychological distance that can be transformative. Modern mindfulness research confirms the power of this approach. Studies show that labeling emotions, "I'm experiencing anxiety," rather than "I'm anxious," reduces their intensity and duration. Brain scans reveal that this simple linguistic shift activates the prefrontal cortex, helping regulate emotional responses by reducing amygdala activation, essentially turning down the volume on your emotional alarm system. This isn't about denying your emotions or pretending they don't exist. Quite the opposite. You're acknowledging them fully while recognizing that you are not defined by them. They are experiences passing through your awareness, not your fundamental identity. A healthcare worker I coached used this technique during periods of overwhelming stress. When the pressure mounted, she would mentally step back and think, "I'm noticing feelings of overwhelm right now." This simple shift prevented her from being consumed by the emotion and allowed her to respond more effectively to the demands of her job. "It's like I went from drowning in the emotion to standing on the shore watching the waves," she told me. "The feeling is still there, but it doesn't control me anymore." You can deepen this practice by adding what psychologists call third-person self-talk. When facing an emotional challenge, try referring to yourself by your name. "John is feeling frustrated right now," rather than "I'm frustrated." Research shows this creates additional psychological distance that enhances emotional regulation. Why does this work so well? When you're fully identified with an emotion, your brain processes the situation through your limbic system, the reactive, emotional part of your brain. The perspective shift activates your prefrontal cortex, the thoughtful, responsive part. You're literally changing which neural networks process the experience. This technique becomes particularly powerful in interpersonal conflicts. When someone says something hurtful, your immediate reaction might be full emotional activation. "I'm hurt and angry." The Stoic perspective shift allows you to create space. "I notice feelings of hurt arising." That's interesting. What judgment is creating this response? This space gives you choice in how to respond, rather than automatically reacting from the emotion. As Viktor Frankl famously said, echoing Stoic wisdom, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response." The Stoics developed additional perspective-expanding practices that work beautifully with this approach. One they called the view from above, imagining your situation from a much broader perspective, as if seeing it from a great height or distance. Try this exercise. When caught in an emotional situation, imagine zooming out until you can see your current circumstances from a wider perspective. How important will this seem in a week, a month, a year, from the perspective of humanity as a whole? This doesn't trivialize your experience, it contextualizes it. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How small a part of the boundless and unfathomable time is assigned to every man, for it is very soon swallowed up in the eternal." A professional I worked with used this technique during a major career setback. When initially passed over for a promotion, he felt devastated, as though his entire professional identity had been damaged. By practicing the view from above, he could see this event as just one moment in a long career, one experience in a full life. This didn't eliminate his disappointment, but transformed it from an all-consuming crisis to a manageable challenge. I asked myself how this would look from 5 years in the future, he told me. Suddenly, I could see potential opportunities I'd been missing because I was so focused on this one path. It's important to distinguish this practice from unhealthy forms of dissociation. The Stoic perspective shift isn't about disconnecting from your emotions. It's about relating to them differently. You're not pushing feelings away. You're observing them with curiosity while maintaining your sense of agency. Think of it like this. When you're watching a powerful movie, you feel real emotions. You might cry during a sad scene or feel your heart race during a suspenseful moment. But part of you knows you're watching a movie. This dual awareness doesn't diminish your experience. It allows you to engage fully while maintaining perspective. The Stoic practice creates this same dual awareness in daily life, fully experiencing emotions while simultaneously observing them with the knowledge that they are passing experiences, not your core identity. A particularly powerful application of this technique is what I call the cloud watching practice. Imagine your thoughts and emotions are like clouds passing through the sky of your awareness. Some are dark and stormy, others light and wispy. Your job isn't to eliminate clouds or create only sunny ones. It's to remember that you are the sky, not the weather. Try this practice daily for just 2 minutes. Close your eyes, notice whatever emotions are present, and visualize them as clouds moving through the vast sky of your awareness. Don't try to change them, just observe their qualities, their intensity, how they move and change naturally. This practice builds your capacity to maintain perspective even during intense emotional experiences. Like any skill, it strengthens with consistent practice. A healthcare professional used this technique during the height of workplace stress. She would take 30 seconds between patients to practice this perspective shift, visualizing her stress, anxiety, and fatigue as weather patterns moving through her awareness rather than defining her experience. This brief practice allowed her to remain present and compassionate when many colleagues were burning out. The emotions were still there, she explained, but I could see them as passing weather rather than who I am. That made all the difference in my ability to keep showing up effectively. The Stoic perspective shift also transforms how we experience difficult thoughts. We often believe our thoughts represent reality. I think it, therefore it's true. The Stoics recognized this fallacy and practiced observing thoughts as mental events rather than facts. Marcus Aurelius advised, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." By observing your thoughts rather than being captured by them, you maintain the freedom to choose which ones to engage with and which to let pass without action. Try this simple practice. For the next hour, when you notice a thought arising, especially a judgmental one, mentally label it as thinking rather than accepting it as reality. That's an interesting thought rather than that's true. Notice how this creates space between you and the thought. This approach is particularly powerful for breaking rumination cycles, those repetitive thought patterns that keep us mentally rehashing past events or worrying about future ones. By observing thoughts rather than being caught in them, you can interrupt these unproductive cycles. A teacher I worked with struggled with ruminating about difficult interactions with students' parents. Through practicing the perspective shift, she learned to observe these thought cycles rather than being consumed by them. I'm noticing I'm replaying that conversation again rather than getting caught in the replay. It was like I finally found the off switch for my worry brain, she told me. Not that the thoughts stopped completely, but I could see them for what they were instead of being trapped in them. You can deepen this practice by using what I call the wise narrator technique. When facing a challenging situation, imagine describing it as a compassionate observer would. Someone who sees both your struggles and your capacity to handle them. This creates immediate perspective and often reveals options you couldn't see when caught in the emotional experience. As you integrate this perspective shift into your daily life, you'll likely notice several significant changes. First, the duration of difficult emotional states tends to shorten. You still experience the initial emotional response, but it passes more quickly when not fueled by complete identification. Second, your relationships often improve as you respond from perspective rather than reactivity. Finally, you develop what the Stoics considered true freedom, the ability to choose your response regardless of circumstances. Remember that this practice isn't about achieving some perfect state of detachment. It's about developing a more skillful relationship with your full human experience, including all your emotions. The goal isn't to stop feeling, it's to feel without being controlled by those feelings. As Epictetus taught, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Your emotions will come and go based on countless factors, many outside your control. What remains within your control is how you relate to them, whether you become identified with them or maintain the perspective that allows for wise response. With consistent practice, this perspective shift becomes more automatic. What once required deliberate effort eventually becomes your natural way of experiencing emotions. You'll still feel the full range of human emotions. That's part of a rich, engaged life. But they'll no longer have the power to hijack your behavior or define your sense of self. Now that you've learned how to create space between yourself and your emotions, let's explore how the Stoics approached one of the greatest emotional challenges, our relationship with circumstances we cannot change. They developed a revolutionary practice of amor fati, or love of fate, that transforms frustration into powerful acceptance. Not passive resignation, but an acceptance that paradoxically increases your effectiveness and peace of mind. The Stoic approach to emotional distance creates a powerful space between you and your feelings. But what about those situations that simply cannot be changed? This is where many people get stuck, fighting against reality itself, wasting precious energy on circumstances beyond their control. The Stoics developed a revolutionary practice that transforms this exhausting battle into something far more powerful. Marcus Aurelius captured this mindset perfectly with 3 simple words: "The obstacle is the way." This wasn't just philosophical wordplay, it was a practical approach to life's inevitable challenges. Instead of seeing obstacles as unfair interruptions to your plans, what if you could view them as the actual path forward? Take a moment to think about something you're currently resisting in your life. Maybe it's a work situation that isn't ideal, a health limitation that frustrates you, or a relationship challenge you wish would just disappear. Feel that resistance for a moment, that sense of "this shouldn't be happening" that creates so much of our suffering. Now, imagine shifting to a completely different perspective, one where you ask, how might this very obstacle be useful to me? What strength might it be building? What opportunity might it be creating? This is the essence of what the Stoics called amor fati, the love of fate. But let's be clear about something important. This isn't about passive resignation or giving up. There's a crucial difference between resignation, which is disempowering, and acceptance, which is liberating. Resignation says, "I can't do anything about this, so I'll just suffer." Acceptance says, "This is the reality I'm working with, so how can I respond most effectively?" Epictetus embodied this principle in the most remarkable way. Born into slavery with a permanent disability, he had every reason to be bitter about his circumstances. Yet he found profound freedom by accepting what he couldn't change while focusing on what he could, his judgments and responses. Make the best use of what is in your power, he taught, and take the rest as it happens. This approach is beautifully practical. Think about the last time you were stuck in terrible traffic. Most people spend that time gripping the steering wheel tighter, checking the time repeatedly and feeling their blood pressure rise with each passing minute. The Stoic practitioner instead thinks, "This traffic is now my current reality. Fighting against it creates suffering. How might I use this time effectively? Perhaps I can listen to that podcast I've been meaning to enjoy, practice deep breathing, or simply appreciate this rare moment of pause in my busy day." The transformation isn't in the external situation. You're still in traffic. The transformation is in your relationship to it. Try this exercise right now. Think of a current challenge you're facing and complete this sentence. This obstacle could serve me by... Come up with at least 3 ways this very challenge might ultimately benefit you, build your character, or create an opportunity you wouldn't otherwise have had. This practice, which I call the obstacle reversal, retrains your mind to automatically look for the potential value in adversity rather than simply reacting with resistance. It's like developing a mental martial art that uses the energy of problems against themselves. A business leader I worked with faced a major product failure that threatened his company's reputation. Instead of just damage control, he applied this principle by asking, "How might this very failure serve us?" The team discovered that customer complaints revealed a much better direction for the product, one they would never have considered without the failure. What seemed like a disaster became the catalyst for their most successful product line. The science behind this approach is fascinating. Research on post-traumatic growth shows that adversity, when engaged with productively, literally rewires neural connections in ways that enhance resilience, creativity, and well-being. Your brain becomes stronger through challenges, but only if you engage with them rather than simply enduring them. Seneca, who experienced exile, loss of fortune, and eventually a death sentence, understood this when he wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." He wasn't suggesting we seek out hardship unnecessarily, but rather that we recognize its transformative potential when it inevitably arrives. One powerful application of this principle is what I call anticipated gratitude, the practice of looking for reasons to be thankful for challenges before their benefits are clear. Instead of waiting until years later to say, "That difficult experience was actually the best thing that happened to me," you cultivate the perspective that allows you to appreciate the growth opportunity while you're still in it. A professional who lost his job unexpectedly shared how this approach transformed his experience. Instead of just focusing on the loss and uncertainty, I ask myself each morning, how might this unexpected change be exactly what I need right now? This simple question opened my mind to possibilities I would never have considered while comfortable in my previous position. 6 months later, he had launched a successful business that aligned far better with his values and strengths than his former job ever did. What makes this approach so powerful is that it works regardless of whether you can immediately see the benefit in a situation. The practice itself creates a mindset of resourcefulness and resilience that transforms how you experience challenges. Try another exercise. Think of something you're currently struggling to accept, a situation you wish were different but cannot change right now. For 60 seconds, ask yourself, if this situation were somehow perfect exactly as it is, what might that mean? What might it be making possible? Don't force an answer. Just hold the question with genuine curiosity. This what if it's perfect? Practice often reveals perspectives that were previously invisible to you. It doesn't deny the difficulty of the situation, but opens your mind to its potential value. A parent caring for a child with special needs described how this practice transformed their experience. I stopped seeing our situation as an unfortunate deviation from the normal life I thought we should have, and began to recognize the unique gifts it was bringing. Greater patience, deeper compassion, a community of remarkable people we would never have met otherwise. The challenges didn't disappear, but my relationship to them fundamentally changed. The Stoics would regularly practice what they called voluntary discomfort, deliberately experiencing inconveniences or difficulties to build this muscle of finding value in adversity. You might take a cold shower, fast for a day, or sleep on the floor occasionally, not as punishment, but as practice in working with discomfort productively. Modern research on hormesis supports this approach. Hormesis is the biological phenomenon where exposure to moderate stress actually strengthens an organism. Your muscles grow stronger through the stress of resistance training. Your immune system develops through exposure to pathogens. Your emotional resilience develops through practicing engagement with challenges. This brings us to what I consider the most counterintuitive aspect of the Stoic approach to obstacles. Acceptance actually increases your power to create change rather than diminishing it. Think about it this way. When you're fighting against reality, insisting something shouldn't be happening, you're using precious energy in resistance rather than response. Accepting what is frees that energy for effective action. A healthcare professional described this paradox beautifully. When I stopped fighting against the limitations of our system and accepted them as my current reality, I actually became more effective at improving it. The energy I had been using to complain and resist was now available for creative problem-solving. This is what the Stoics meant by the obstacle becoming the way. Your challenges aren't separate from your path. They are your path. The very things that seem to be blocking you are actually creating the specific journey that will develop your particular strengths and contributions. Try one more exercise. Think about a limitation you've been resenting. Perhaps a health issue, a financial constraint, or a difficult relationship. For the next 60 seconds, explore this question. What specific strength or capability might this limitation be developing in me that I wouldn't develop otherwise? A writer who struggled with chronic health issues shared how this perspective transformed his relationship with his condition. I stopped seeing my limited energy as just a restriction and began recognizing how it forced me to become extremely discerning about where I focus. This discipline of prioritization became my greatest professional asset, one I might never have developed without this constraint. To make this approach practical in daily life, I recommend keeping an obstacles and opportunities journal. Each evening, note one challenge you faced during the day and at least 3 potential ways it might serve your development or create unexpected opportunities. This trains your mind to automatically look for the value in difficulties rather than just reacting to them. The beauty of this practice is that it doesn't require any external circumstances to change for you to experience its benefits. The transformation happens in your relationship with reality itself. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Remember that embracing obstacles doesn't mean you never work to change difficult circumstances. The Stoics were people of tremendous action and impact, but they understood that effective action begins with accepting reality as it currently is, rather than wasting energy wishing it were different. This approach resolves the paradox many people feel torn between, accepting things as they are versus working to improve them. The Stoic insight is that true acceptance is actually the foundation for effective change, not its opposite. As you develop this relationship with obstacles, you'll likely notice several profound shifts. First, your baseline stress level often decreases as you stop fighting with reality itself. Second, your creative problem-solving abilities frequently expand as you engage with challenges rather than just reacting to them. Third, your resilience grows as you develop confidence in your ability to find value in any situation. The practice of amor fati, loving what happens, doesn't mean pretending difficulties are pleasant. It means recognizing that everything that happens, including the challenging parts, creates the specific journey that develops your unique strengths and contributions. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters. While transforming individual obstacles is powerful, the Stoics understood that we need a broader framework to evaluate what really matters in life. They developed a revolutionary system of values they called virtues, not in the moralistic sense, but as essential human capacities. When you understand these 4 Stoic virtues, you'll have an internal compass to navigate all emotional decisions with clarity and purpose. Now that you've learned to transform obstacles, let's address a fundamental question. How do you know which challenges are worth facing? With so many decisions in life, how can you consistently choose the best path forward without constantly second-guessing yourself? This is where the Stoics developed something truly revolutionary, a system of values they called virtues. But forget any moralistic associations you might have with that word. The Stoic virtues aren't about rigid rules or perfect behavior. They're more like an internal navigation system for making decisions with clarity, even in emotionally complex situations. Think about the last time you faced a difficult choice. Perhaps you wondered whether to have an uncomfortable conversation with someone or avoid the conflict. Maybe you debated whether to take a career risk or stay with the safer option. In these moments, what guided your decision? Most people rely on fluctuating emotional states, social pressure, or simple habit, none of which consistently lead to decisions we're proud of later. The Stoics recognized this problem centuries ago. As Seneca noted, if a man doesn't know which port he's sailing to, no wind is favorable. Without clear values to guide us, we're constantly blown about by circumstances and impulses, making inconsistent decisions that often leave us questioning ourselves. This is why the Stoics developed their system of 4 core virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These aren't abstract philosophical concepts. They're practical capacities that, when developed, create a life of meaning and emotional resilience. Let's explore each virtue and how it serves as a decision-making compass in everyday life. Practical wisdom, phronesis, is the ability to navigate complex situations with clarity, distinguishing what we can change from what we must accept. It's not theoretical knowledge, but applied discernment, knowing the right action in each specific circumstance. Think of practical wisdom as your inner GPS for life's complex terrain. When facing a difficult situation, it asks, what's the reality of this situation? What's in my control? What principles should guide my response here? Try this exercise right now. Think of a decision you're currently wrestling with. First, identify the facts of the situation. Separate from your emotional reactions or assumptions. Next, clarify what aspects are within your control versus what isn't. Finally, ask what response would represent your best judgment, all things considered. A healthcare professional I worked with used this wise decision framework when deciding whether to accept a promotion that offered more money but less patient contact. Rather than simply following the emotional pull of financial security, she clarified the reality. Both options had valid trade-offs, identified what was in her control, her career path, not the structure of the roles, and determined that direct patient care aligned more closely with her deepest values. The clarity this process created eliminated the anxiety of second-guessing herself later. The second virtue, courage, Andrea, might seem straightforward, but the Stoics understood it differently than we often do. It's not about fearlessness or reckless action, but about facing emotional discomfort when principles require it. It's the capacity to act despite fear, not in the absence of it. In daily life, courage often involves willingly experiencing difficult emotions in service of what matters. Speaking up when it would be easier to stay silent. Setting a boundary when you fear disapproval. Being vulnerable when you'd prefer to protect your ego. I want you to try something. Think of a situation where you know the right action, but hesitate because of emotional discomfort. Maybe it's a conversation you're avoiding, a change you're postponing, or a truth you're not facing. For 60 seconds, imagine yourself taking that action despite the discomfort, focusing on your values rather than your fear. This discomfort zone practice builds your capacity for principled action, even when emotions pull you toward the easier path. A professional I coached used this to finally address performance issues with a team member after months of avoidance. I realized I was prioritizing my temporary comfort over both the team's needs and the employee's right to clear feedback, he explained. Focusing on the principles involved gave me the courage to have the conversation, which turned out far better than I'd feared. The third virtue, justice, dikaiosini, isn't about punishment, but about fairness and proper relationships, treating others with the respect they deserve as fellow human beings. It involves recognizing our social nature and the obligations that come with it. In practice, justice guides how we interact with others and contribute to our communities. It asks, am I treating others fairly? Am I fulfilling my appropriate roles and responsibilities? Are my actions contributing to the common good? Try this expanded perspective exercise. In a current conflict or decision that affects others, mentally step into each person's position. What might they need? How might your actions affect them? What would fairness look like from multiple perspectives? A leader in a family business used this approach during a succession planning process that was creating tension among siblings. By explicitly considering each family member's perspective, needs, and contributions, rather than just his own interests, he developed an approach that maintained both family harmony and business viability. The process wasn't about finding a compromise everyone could tolerate, he told me, but about expanding my perspective to see what true fairness required. The fourth virtue, temperance, sophrosin, is about finding the balanced middle path between extremes, not denying pleasure but avoiding being controlled by it. It's self-regulation and moderation in all things. We need temperance daily in a world of constant excess and immediate gratification. It helps us maintain balanced relationships with technology, food, work, leisure, and even our emotional reactions. It asks, is this response proportionate? Am I finding the middle path between too much and too little? Practice the middle path technique right now. Think of a situation where you tend toward an extreme response, perhaps overworking or procrastinating, over-planning or improvising, speaking too much or too little. What would the balanced middle path look like? Not perfect moderation, but the appropriate amount for this specific context? An entrepreneur I worked with used this framework to transform his relationship with work. He had oscillated between intense 60-hour weeks and periods of burnout and disengagement. By identifying the middle path, consistent, sustainable effort rather than extremes, he actually accomplished more while experiencing greater well-being. What makes these four virtues so powerful is that they work together as a system. Wisdom without courage becomes mere intellectual understanding without action. Courage without wisdom becomes recklessness. Justice without temperance can become fanaticism. Each virtue balances and enhances the others. Together, they create what Marcus Aurelius called the smooth flow of life. Not a perfect existence without challenges, but one where your decisions align with your deepest values, creating integrity between your actions and beliefs. How do you apply these virtues to everyday decisions? I suggest a simple virtue filter practice. When facing a difficult choice, ask yourself, 1. Wisdom. What's the reality of this situation? What's within my control? 2. Courage. What action might I be avoiding due to fear or discomfort? 3. Justice. How does this decision affect others? What's fair to all involved? 4. Temperance. What's the balanced approach here, avoiding both excess and deficiency? The answers to these questions won't always be clear-cut, but the process itself clarifies your thinking and connects decisions to your deepest values rather than momentary impulses. This framework proves particularly valuable in workplace decisions where multiple priorities compete. A manager facing pressure to cut corners to meet a deadline can ask, does wisdom suggest this shortcut will create more problems later? Does courage require standing firm despite pressure? Does justice consider the impact on customers and team members? Does temperance suggest a balanced approach between quality and timeline? In relationships, the virtues provide clarity during conflicts. When someone has hurt or disappointed you, wisdom helps distinguish what you can control from what you can't. Courage may involve having a difficult conversation rather than withdrawing. Justice considers both your needs and theirs. Temperance helps you respond proportionately rather than underreacting or overreacting. A couple I worked with transformed their conflict pattern using this framework. Rather than escalating disagreements or avoiding them entirely, both extremes, they learned to address issues with wisdom, understanding each other's perspective, courage, saying difficult truths, justice, ensuring both voices were heard, and temperance, responding proportionately rather than bringing up past grievances. What's particularly valuable about the virtues is that they provide guidance, even in novel situations where you have no precedent to follow. Unlike rigid rules that break down in complex circumstances, the virtues offer flexible principles that adapt to any context. Try this daily practice to develop your inner Stoic voice based on the virtues. Each evening, reflect on one decision you made today. How did it align with each virtue? Where might you have applied the virtues more effectively? This virtue review builds your capacity to automatically filter decisions through these principles. Remember that developing virtue is a practice, not a destination. The Stoics viewed themselves as prokoptontes, those who are making progress. No one perfectly embodies these virtues all the time. The aim is continuous growth, not perfection. As Epictetus reminded his students, if you have assumed a character above your strength, you have both acted in this matter in an unbecoming way, and you have neglected that which you might have fulfilled. By working with the virtues as an integrated system, you develop what modern psychologists call moral expertise, the ability to recognize the ethical dimensions of situations automatically and respond appropriately without lengthy deliberation. Like any expertise, this comes through consistent practice rather than theoretical understanding. The beauty of this approach is that it creates an internal compass that remains stable regardless of external chaos. When you're guided by these principles rather than momentary emotions or social pressure, you develop what the Stoics called eudaimonia, not just happiness as a feeling, but flourishing as a human being. Now that you have a compass for decision-making based on the virtues, let's apply it to one of our most challenging areas, our relationships with other people. The Stoics had a revolutionary perspective on human interactions that instantly eliminates most conflicts and misunderstandings. It begins with a surprising question. What if the actions of others aren't really about you at all? Now that you have your internal compass based on the virtues, let's apply it to perhaps the most challenging arena of life, your relationships with other people. Because let's be honest, other people can be the greatest source of both joy and frustration in our lives. Have you ever found yourself replaying an interaction over and over, wondering why someone said what they did, or why they didn't respond the way you expected? Of course you have. We all have. But what if I told you that the Stoics discovered a perspective on human relationships that instantly dissolves much of this suffering? Epictetus captured this revolutionary insight when he wrote, "Remember that it is not who criticizes you or who points out how you have stumbled that does you harm, Rather, it is your judgment about the criticism that harms you. This may sound simple, but it represents a profound shift in how we experience our interactions with others. Let's start with what I call the primary cause exercise. Think about a recent interaction that left you feeling hurt, angry, or misunderstood. Now ask yourself, what was the primary cause of the other person's behavior? Most of us automatically answer this question with something about ourselves. They don't respect me. They were trying to make me look bad. They don't care about my feelings. But the Stoic perspective suggests something radically different. Other people's actions arise primarily from their own perceptions, beliefs, and internal state, not from you at all. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. That last part is crucial. Marcus wasn't suggesting people are inherently bad. He was acknowledging that people act from their own limited understanding, just as we all do. Try this right now. Think of someone whose behavior has been frustrating you lately. For 30 seconds, imagine what might be happening in their life, what pressures they might be under, what beliefs or fears might be driving their actions. Don't focus on yourself at all. Just consider their internal world. Did you notice a shift in your perspective? Many people report an immediate softening of judgment when they practice this complete story technique. This doesn't mean excusing truly harmful behavior. It means recognizing that most actions others take aren't about you at all. They're the result of that person's own inner landscape. A manager I worked with transformed a difficult relationship with a team member using this approach. I had been interpreting his short emails and missed deadlines as disrespect toward me, she explained. When I considered what might be happening in his world, the pressures he was under, his different communication style, I could see his behavior in a completely new light. This didn't immediately solve our work issues, but it completely changed how I approached our interactions. This perspective connects directly to the dichotomy of control we explored earlier. When it comes to relationships, what can you actually control? You can control your own responses, boundaries, and actions. You cannot control others' perceptions, choices, or behaviors. As Epictetus bluntly put it, if it concerns anything not in your control, be ready to say that it is nothing to you. This isn't about becoming indifferent to others. It's about recognizing the natural limits of your influence, which paradoxically makes you more effective in relationships. When you stop trying to control how others behave or feel, something impossible anyway, you can focus your energy on what actually matters, your own responses and choices. But what about when others criticize you or offer feedback that stings? The Stoics had a particularly valuable approach here. Instead of automatically rejecting criticism or being devastated by it, they suggested separating the delivery from the content and evaluating the feedback on its own merits. Try what I call the neutral audience test. If a neutral third party heard this criticism, would they find any merit in it? Is there something you could learn here, even if it's delivered poorly? This doesn't mean accepting all criticism as valid, but it means not dismissing potentially valuable feedback just because it hurts your pride. A professional I coached used this approach to transform how she received feedback from her supervisor. I used to either get defensive or feel crushed by critical feedback, she told me. By mentally stepping back and asking whether there was something useful in the criticism, regardless of how it was delivered, I could extract the value without the emotional roller coaster. Some feedback I still discard as unhelpful, but now it's a conscious choice rather than an emotional reaction. The Stoics also had a fascinating perspective on dealing with difficult people. Rather than seeing them as obstacles, they viewed challenging interactions as opportunities for practice, what I call the training ground technique. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." This perspective transforms difficult interactions from frustrations to opportunities for developing your own character. The person who tests your patience is giving you a chance to practice patience. The individual who challenges your ideas is helping you refine your thinking. The colleague who doesn't follow through is helping you practice managing expectations. A teacher applied this approach to a particularly challenging parent who sent constant critical emails. Instead of dreading each message, I began to see our interactions as practice for maintaining my equanimity and responding from principles rather than emotion, she explained. Ironically, once I stopped reacting emotionally, our relationship gradually improved, though that wasn't even my primary goal. Another powerful Stoic technique for relationships is what I call the human nature practice. This involves recognizing that certain behaviors are simply part of human nature, which helps reduce unrealistic expectations about how others should behave. Seneca advised, "We should make ourselves flexible so that we do not pin our hopes too much on our plans and can move without distress to whatever happens." In relationships, this means developing realistic expectations about human behavior. Not everyone will be punctual, thoughtful, or direct, no matter how much we might wish otherwise. Try this right now. Think of someone whose behavior consistently frustrates you. Ask yourself, am I expecting something from this person that goes against their demonstrated nature? What if I accepted them as they actually are, rather than as I wish they would be? A client transformed her relationship with her chronically late friend through this practice. "I realized I was getting angry every time as if her lateness was surprising, when it had been consistent for years," she told me. "When I accepted this as part of her nature, not ideal but reality, I could make better choices, like bringing a book to read or giving her a different arrival time. My frustration virtually disappeared, not because she changed, but because my expectations aligned with reality." The Stoics also developed a powerful approach to communication that I call Stoic expression, stating your needs clearly without emotional demands. This combines honesty about your experience with recognition that others' responses remain outside your control. Instead of, "You never listen to me," an accusation that typically triggers defensiveness, the Stoic approach might be, "I'd like to share something important to me, and I'd appreciate your full attention for a few minutes." The first creates conflict. The second expresses a need while respecting the other person's agency. Try reframing a recent communication challenge using this approach. How could you express your needs or perspective without making demands about how the other person should feel or respond? A couple I worked with transformed their conflict pattern using this technique. Instead of, "You don't care about my feelings," the partner learned to say, "When plans change without discussion, I feel unimportant. I'd like us to make decisions together." This shifted conversations from accusations to actual problem solving. One of the most powerful Stoic practices for relationships is what I call the role reversal exercise. When in conflict with someone, deliberately try to see the situation from their perspective, not just intellectually, but emotionally. What might their experience be? What pressures or beliefs might be influencing them? Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly. "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger." This isn't about taking blame that isn't yours. It's about developing the capacity to see beyond your own limited perspective. A professional used this technique during a tense negotiation. Instead of just focusing on my needs and positions, I spent time genuinely considering their constraints, pressures, and interests, he explained. This didn't lead me to abandon my goals, but it completely changed the tone of our discussion from adversarial to collaborative. We found solutions I wouldn't have seen from my perspective alone. What about situations involving manipulation or truly difficult behavior? The Stoic perspective shift is particularly valuable here. By maintaining psychological distance, observing the manipulation rather than being caught in it, you can respond strategically rather than reactively. Epictetus advised, "Remember that you are an actor in a play of such a kind as the author chooses." When dealing with manipulative behavior, you can see it as a script being offered to you, one you can choose not to follow. You can observe, this person is attempting to make me feel guilty to get what they want, without actually taking on that guilt. A manager used this approach with a chronically complaining employee who would try to make her feel responsible for all workplace problems. By seeing these interactions as a pattern rather than getting emotionally entangled each time, I could respond consistently without the emotional drain, she explained. I could offer appropriate support while maintaining clear boundaries about what issues were within my role to address. Speaking of boundaries, the Stoics understood their importance long before modern psychology. Setting healthy boundaries isn't about controlling others, it's about clarifying what you will and won't participate in. As Epictetus said, "Make it your study to respond to every harsh impression with gentleness and cheerfulness, saying, 'This is nothing to me.'" Boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They're clear definitions of where your responsibility ends and another's begins. They're expressions of self-respect that, paradoxically, create healthier relationships. Finally, the Stoics emphasized what I call intentional connection. Cultivating relationships based on shared values rather than mere convenience or habit. Seneca wrote extensively about friendship, noting that we should choose friends carefully, but then commit to them deeply. Take a moment to reflect. Which of your relationships align most closely with your core values? How might you invest more intentionally in these connections? The Stoics suggested that fewer, deeper relationships contribute more to well-being than many superficial ones. As you implement these Stoic relationship principles, I recommend a daily, relational check-in based on Stoic principles. Each evening, reflect on one significant interaction from your day. What was within your control in this interaction versus outside it? What judgments were you making about the other person's behavior? How might the virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance guide your response? This practice builds your capacity to bring Stoic principles into your relationships consistently, transforming not just individual interactions, but the overall quality of your connections. Mastering your relationships with others is transformative, but there's an even more important relationship to develop: the one with yourself. The Stoics practiced a type of self-compassion radically different from what we see today, based not on feeling good about yourself, but on unsparing honesty combined with total acceptance. This approach resolves the cycle of self-criticism and denial that keeps so many of us trapped. Mastering your relationships with others transforms your social world. But there's an even more fundamental relationship that determines everything else: the one with yourself. And here, the Stoics developed an approach to self-compassion that looks radically different from much of what we see in modern self-help. When you hear self-compassion, you might imagine positive affirmations in the mirror or giving yourself permission to indulge after a hard day. But the Stoic version is simultaneously more honest and more profound. As Marcus Aurelius advised himself, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." Yet he balanced this with remarkable self-acceptance. Be gentle with yourself. You are doing the best you can with what you understand. This paradoxical combination, unsparing honesty paired with deep acceptance, creates a relationship with yourself that's both transformative and sustainable. It's not about feeling good about yourself all the time. It's about seeing yourself clearly and accepting what you find without harsh judgment. Think about how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. Is your inner voice more critical than you'd ever be to a friend? Most of us have internalized a harsh inner critic that we mistakenly believe motivates us, when research shows it actually undermines performance and well-being. Try this simple exercise right now. Recall a recent mistake or setback, nothing too major, just something that didn't go as you hoped. Notice the tone of your inner voice as you think about it. Is it harsh? Demanding? Now imagine a good friend came to you having made the same mistake. How would you speak to them? What tone would you use? What perspective might you offer? This wise friend practice reveals the often dramatic difference between how we treat others and how we treat ourselves. The Stoic approach to self-compassion begins by closing this gap, not by lowering your standards, but by speaking to yourself with the same wisdom and perspective you'd offer someone you care about. A perfectionist I worked with discovered that her harsh self-criticism, far from motivating excellence, was actually causing procrastination. I was so afraid of my own brutal self-judgment that I'd avoid starting projects until the last minute, she explained. By practicing speaking to herself as she would to a respected colleague, she found she could maintain high standards while eliminating the paralyzing fear of her own inner critic. The Stoic approach differs from some modern self-compassion in a crucial way. It's not about lowering your standards or excusing mistakes. It's about responding to shortcomings with wisdom rather than emotional reactivity. As Epictetus taught, if anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, "He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone." This humorous response demonstrates the Stoic balance, acknowledging faults without being defined or diminished by them. It's not defensive, nor is it self-flagellating. It's simply clear-eyed. The second component of Stoic self-compassion involves what modern psychologists call common humanity, recognizing that imperfection and struggle are universal human experiences, not evidence of personal deficiency. The Stoics deeply understood our shared human nature, with all its flaws and limitations. Seneca wrote, "I am not a wise man, and I never will be." This wasn't false modesty, but a recognition that perfect wisdom remains an aspiration for all humans. By acknowledging our shared imperfection, we move from the isolating thought, "I'm failing," to the connecting awareness, "This is part of being human." Try this shared humanity practice. Think of something you've been criticizing yourself for lately. Now consider how many other humans throughout history have struggled with the same issue. Feel that sense of connection with countless others who have faced similar challenges. This doesn't eliminate the need for growth, but it places your struggles in a proper human context. A professional who made a significant error at work transformed his shame through this practice. Instead of seeing my mistake as evidence that I was fundamentally incompetent, I recognized that errors are an inevitable part of being human, especially when learning new skills, he explained. This didn't eliminate my responsibility to improve, but it removed the debilitating shame that was preventing me from moving forward constructively. The third element of Stoic self-compassion involves what I call assessment without judgment. The ability to evaluate your behavior objectively without condemning yourself as a person. This distinction between actions and identity is crucial for growth. Marcus Aurelius practiced this consistently. When you've done something wrong, don't be afraid of correction, but admit what's happened immediately. Notice the focus on the specific action rather than global self-criticism. Not, "I'm a failure," but "that approach didn't work." Try this right now. Think of something you're currently unhappy with about yourself. Notice if you're making global judgments about your worth. "I'm inadequate," rather than assessing specific behaviors. "I could improve how I manage my time." Reframe any global judgments into specific behaviors that can actually be addressed. The paradox of this approach is that when you separate behavior evaluation from self-worth, you actually become more capable of change. Shame and harsh self-judgment typically trigger defensiveness and avoidance, while clear-eyed assessment, paired with self-acceptance, creates the psychological safety needed for genuine growth. A client who struggled with procrastination discovered this paradox firsthand. "I used to berate myself constantly as lazy and undisciplined, which only made me feel worse and procrastinate more," she explained. "When I learned to separate my worth from my behaviors, to say I'm struggling with consistent action rather than I'm a lazy person, I could actually look at the problem clearly and develop effective solutions." This brings us to a fascinating aspect of Stoic self-compassion. It actually leads to more progress, not less. Many people fear that being kind to themselves will lead to complacency, but research consistently shows the opposite. Self-compassion is associated with greater personal responsibility, more ambitious goal setting, and better recovery from setbacks. The Stoics understood this counterintuitive truth. By accepting yourself fully, while also seeing clearly where improvement is needed, you create the optimal conditions for growth. As Epictetus advised, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things. I call this the paradox of self-compassion. By releasing the need to see yourself as already perfect, you create the conditions for genuine improvement. It's only when we accept where we truly are that we can move effectively toward where we want to be. A perfectionist business owner transformed his approach to challenges through this understanding. "I used to believe my harsh self-criticism was what drove my success, but it was actually creating anxiety that impaired my decision-making," he told me. "When I learned to treat myself with the same balanced perspective I'd offer a respected colleague, my performance actually improved. Not because I lowered my standards, but because I could think more clearly without the emotional static of self-condemnation." One particularly powerful Stoic practice for self-compassion involves working with regret. The past can't be changed. It's definitively outside our control. Yet, many of us torture ourselves with thoughts about what we should have done differently. The Stoic approach isn't to pretend you have no regrets, but to extract the learning from past actions without the emotional self-flagellation. Try the inner child exercise. Think of a past decision you've been criticizing yourself for. Imagine your younger self at that moment, with the information and emotional resources you had then. What would you say to that younger version of yourself from your current perspective? Most people naturally find a balance of understanding and guidance that's far wiser than their usual self-criticism. This approach is particularly powerful for healing formative experiences. By bringing adult wisdom to memories of childhood or young adult experiences, you can reframe these events with compassion rather than shame. This doesn't change what happened, but it can transform how these experiences affect you now. A professional who had carried shame about academic struggles in his youth used this technique to recognize how various undiagnosed learning differences had affected him. "I could finally see that younger version of myself with compassion rather than judgment," he explained. "I wasn't lazy or stupid. I was doing the best I could with limited support and understanding. This realization freed me from decades of unnecessary shame." Another powerful Stoic practice for self-compassion involves working with our relationship to time. We often judge ourselves harshly based on where we think we should be at this point in our lives, comparing ourselves to either others or our own expectations. The Stoics had a more nuanced view of time, recognizing that each person's journey unfolds according to its own natural schedule. Seneca wrote, "We are not given a short life, but we make it short, and we are not ill-supplied, but wasteful of it." This perspective shifts us from lamenting the past to focusing on how we use our time now. The question becomes not, why haven't I achieved X yet, but how am I using my time today? Try what I call the time perspective practice. For any area where you're judging yourself harshly about progress, ask, if I continue making small improvements in this area consistently, where might I be in 5 years? This shifts from impatience with current results to appreciation of the process of growth itself. One of the most practical Stoic tools for self-compassion is the Self-Compassion Journal, a regular practice of documenting both areas for improvement and the progress you're making without harsh judgment. Unlike toxic positivity that ignores real issues or harsh self-criticism that ignores progress, this balanced approach creates sustainable growth. Each evening, briefly note, what did I struggle with today? What can I learn from this? What did I do well or make progress on? This creates a feedback loop that strengthens your relationship with yourself over time. The Stoics also distinguished between guilt, potentially useful, and shame, rarely productive. Guilt focuses on specific behaviors. That action didn't align with my values. Shame makes global judgments about identity. I am defective. Guilt can motivate positive change. Shame typically triggers hiding or defensive behaviors. Try the compassionate observer technique right now. Notice any thoughts of self-criticism passing through your mind. Rather than identifying with them, I am inadequate, or fighting against them, I shouldn't feel this way. Simply observe them with curiosity. There's that not good enough thought again. Interesting how persistent it is. This creates distance between you and the thought without denying the thought exists. As Marcus Aurelius advised, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. By observing thoughts rather than becoming them, you maintain choice about which ones to engage with. This approach is particularly effective for breaking rumination cycles, those repetitive negative thoughts that keep us mentally stuck. By observing thoughts rather than being caught in them, you can interrupt these unproductive patterns and redirect your attention to constructive action. A teacher who struggled with replaying difficult interactions found freedom through this practice. I used to get caught in loops of self-criticism after challenging classroom moments, she explained. By learning to observe these thoughts rather than identify with them, I could acknowledge them without being controlled by them. This freed up mental energy I could direct toward actual solutions rather than self-criticism. As you develop a more compassionate relationship with yourself, you'll likely notice several significant changes. First, you'll probably recover more quickly from setbacks, since you're not adding layers of harsh self-judgment to the initial disappointment. Second, you may take more worthwhile risks, since failure no longer threatens your sense of self-worth. Third, your relationships often improve as the compassion you show yourself naturally extends to others. Remember that developing Stoic self-compassion, like all aspects of this philosophy, is a practice rather than a destination. As Seneca noted, we are all making progress rather than having arrived at perfect wisdom. Each time you catch yourself in harsh self-judgment and respond with balanced perspective instead, you strengthen this capacity. Now that you've developed these powerful tools, let's bring everything together into a practical daily system that takes just 20 minutes, 10 minutes in the morning and 10 at night. The Stoics had specific routines that transformed abstract philosophy into real-life changes. I'll show you exactly how to implement your own daily Stoic ritual to consolidate everything you've learned and create lasting transformation. Now that you've developed these powerful tools, it's time to bring everything together into a system that makes this ancient wisdom part of your daily life. Because let's be honest, even the most profound philosophy means little if it stays trapped in the realm of ideas, without transforming how you actually live. The Stoics understood this challenge well. They weren't interested in abstract theorizing, but in practical wisdom that could be applied in the messiness of everyday life. As Epictetus insisted to his students, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. This is why they developed specific daily practices to integrate their principles into the fabric of their lives. I'm going to share with you a 30-day program that transforms these powerful ideas into a sustainable practice. Each component builds upon the others, creating a system that becomes increasingly natural with time. Think of it as training wheels for your mind, initially requiring conscious effort, but eventually becoming your default way of engaging with life. Let's start with week 1, where we establish your emotional awareness foundation. The first 3 days focus on what I call the control inventory practice. Each morning before checking your phone or email, this timing is crucial. Take 5 minutes to create 2 columns on paper or in your notes app, within my control and outside my control. List aspects of your current challenges in the appropriate columns. This simple act of categorization creates immediate clarity that sets the tone for your entire day. Rather than being pulled in countless directions by every concern that crosses your mind, you'll start with a clear focus on where your energy can actually make a difference. A financial analyst who implemented this practice during a volatile period told me, "It completely transformed my emotional stability at work. Instead of constantly reacting to market fluctuations I couldn't control, I focused exclusively on my analysis quality and client communication, things I could influence. My stress decreased while my effectiveness actually increased." For days 4 through 7, implement what I call the emotion-judgment connection practice. Carry a small notebook or use a notes app, and whenever you experience a strong emotion, pause and write down 3 things: the situation that occurred, the emotion you're feeling, and the judgment or interpretation creating this emotion. Don't try to change anything yet. Just observe the connection between your judgments and your emotions. This builds the metacognitive awareness essential for emotional mastery. A teacher discovered through this exercise that her stress wasn't coming from her students' behavior, but from her interpretation that I should be able to control every aspect of my classroom. This awareness alone reduced her emotional suffering before she even attempted to change her thinking. Try this right now. Think of a recent emotional reaction you had, perhaps frustration with a slow website, irritation with someone's comment, or anxiety about an upcoming event. Can you identify the specific judgment that created that emotion? Was it, "This shouldn't take so long," or "They're being disrespectful," or "This might go badly"? Just noticing this connection gives you power. As you move into week 2, you'll implement the core techniques we've explored. Days 8 through 10 focus on the morning premeditation practice. Spend 3 minutes each morning visualizing potential challenges in your day and rehearsing your calm, rational response. Be specific. Imagine the exact situations, people, and triggers you might encounter. This practice creates what neuroscientists call mental maps, neural pathways that your brain can follow during stress rather than defaulting to fight or flight responses. A sales professional who implemented this technique before client meetings found that his anxiety decreased by approximately 40%, and his ability to handle objections improved dramatically. For days 11 through 14, practice the real-time reframe technique. When you notice a strong emotional reaction, pause and identify your current interpretation. Ask if this is the only possible interpretation, generate at least 3 alternative explanations, and select the most balanced perspective. Remember, this isn't about forcing positivity, it's about accuracy. A parent I worked with used this technique when her teenager was unresponsive to texts. Instead of interpreting it as "she's in danger" or "she's disrespecting me," she generated alternatives like "she's engaged in an activity" or "her phone might be on silent." This reduced her anxiety while waiting for a response. As you enter week 3, you'll deepen the practice with the evening reflection. For days 15 through 17, end each day by asking yourself 3 questions. What upset me today? What story was I telling myself? And what would have been a more accurate perspective? This creates a feedback loop that strengthens your emotional resilience with each passing day. Studies show that reflective practices like this significantly improve emotional regulation over time. A manager transformed his relationships with difficult team members using this technique. By identifying his habitual interpretations, like "they're deliberately undermining me," he could shift to more balanced perspectives. They might have different priorities or information. For days 18 through 21, practice the perspective expansion technique. When emotions arise, mentally step back and observe them without judgment. Label the experience, "I notice anger arising," rather than "I am angry," and ask how important this will seem in a week, a month, or a year. This combines Stoic wisdom with modern mindfulness approaches. A medical professional used this during high-stress procedures and reported it completely changed my ability to stay focused under pressure. Week 4 focuses on integration and advancement. For days 22 through 25, identify your top 3 emotional triggers, specific situations that consistently create strong reactions. For each one, apply the dichotomy of control, create pre-written alternative interpretations, and develop a specific response plan. This proactive approach transforms your most challenging emotional patterns. A client with social anxiety used this technique for networking events. By preparing alternative interpretations for awkward conversational moments, she reduced her anxiety and actually began enjoying these previously dreaded situations. For the final 5 days, combine all techniques into a comprehensive daily practice. Morning control inventory and premeditation, 5 minutes. Real-time reframes and perspective shifts throughout the day, and an evening reflection, 5 minutes. By day 30, these practices will begin to feel natural rather than effortful. You're not just learning techniques, you're developing a new relationship with your emotional life. Remember that this transformation isn't always linear. You might experience what I call emotional aftershocks. Moments when old patterns reassert themselves. This is normal and actually part of the rewiring process. Each time you notice and redirect these patterns, you strengthen new neural pathways. A business owner described this journey as 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but definitely moving forward. By week 3, she noticed significantly reduced reactivity to client demands that previously triggered immediate stress responses. It's also important to acknowledge that this work can feel strange at first. Our culture has conditioned us to believe that emotions happen to us rather than through us. As one participant put it, "I felt almost guilty at first, like I was cheating at emotions by not letting them control me." This discomfort is temporary and gives way to a profound sense of emotional freedom. You'll likely notice several changes as you progress through this program. First, you'll experience an increased gap between trigger and response, that precious space where choice lives. Second, you'll gain greater clarity during emotional situations, seeing options that were previously invisible. Third, the duration of negative emotional states will typically decrease. You'll recover more quickly from upsets. Additionally, your relationships will often improve as you respond rather than react to others. And finally, many people report enhanced decision-making under pressure as emotions inform their choices rather than controlling them. Try this simple exercise right now to get a taste of the transformation available to you. Think of a recent situation that triggered a strong emotional reaction. First, identify what aspects were within your control versus outside it. Next, notice the judgment that created your emotional response. Then, generate 3 alternative interpretations that might equally explain the situation. Finally, imagine observing this emotion with curious distance, rather than being consumed by it. Even this brief practice gives you a glimpse of the freedom available when you apply these principles consistently. Remember that the goal isn't to eliminate emotions, but to develop a healthier relationship with them. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." I encourage you to commit to this 30-day program starting today. Which technique resonates most strongly with you? What specific emotional challenge would you most like to transform? Taking just 5 minutes now to set this intention dramatically increases your likelihood of implementation. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Your journey to Stoic emotional mastery begins with a single practice. Remember that consistent application of even one technique will create more transformation than perfect understanding of all techniques without implementation. As Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." The very struggle you're facing with emotional control isn't a sign of weakness, but the beginning of a journey toward the unshakable inner peace you've been searching for. The ancient Stoics walked this path through plague, exile, and political turmoil. Their wisdom has endured because it addresses the universal human condition, the same condition you experience in your daily life. By embracing these practices, you're connecting with a lineage of wisdom that spans centuries. Practical wisdom that has helped countless individuals find tranquility amid chaos. Now it's your turn to take these timeless principles and make them your own. The counterintuitive truth remains: trying to fight emotions only makes them stronger. True mastery comes from understanding them at their source and changing your relationship with them. This is the Stoic path to emotional freedom, not through struggle against reality, but through alignment with it. Begin today. Your future self will thank you.